Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Office Coworker Psycho, submitted by Alex. I was 33 years old when I learned that some people are really fucked up, and they decide a lot of things that you don't decide for yourself. I was doing very well at my company. I worked in the marketing department of a small business, and then came Lila, 28 years old, and they hired her the same month our company announced a management opening in my division. I got the management position, and she was hired to replace me. The weird thing is I was not in on the interview committee, but that happened all the time. People were hired without any say of anybody in whatever department they worked in. Well, Lila walked in on day one like she already owned the building. Tight leather skirt, perfect hair, and this toothpaste smile that make people forgive things that they haven't even said yet. And at first, she was just friendly. Then I realized maybe she was a little too friendly. After about a month, I noticed that she was getting a little too close. I'd be at my desk working, and she'd kind of lean on the edge of it, close enough that I could smell her perfume, and she'd laugh at things that weren't jokes, and she always touched my arm when she talked. She asked questions that didn't make any sense, and a lot of times they were questions for someone from another department. It was like she was trying to find a reason to come over and talk to me. One night, I was at work around 6 o'clock, an hour after I normally knocked off, and I heard a voice next to me. "So, what does your girlfriend think about you working so late?" Yeah, Lila was there. I remember blinking at her and saying, she trusts me? Lila smiled in a way that made my stomach tighten. She said, "I guess she should." That night I told my girlfriend Emma about Lila. I hadn't really talked about her that much. We kind of laughed it off and just said maybe she's just like that innocuous office flirt. Harmless. A dingbat. But it stopped being funny when Lila started showing up in places that she shouldn't have. She'd show up in meetings she wasn't invited to. She'd happened to be in the parking garage when I left. And one morning, she brought me coffee, my exact order, which is a little odd, I'll say. And she told me, "You looked really tired yesterday." I'd never told her my coffee order or anybody else. I thought it was odd. I went to my boss, Carl, who was a solid, no-nonsense guy in his 50s. "I think Lila's crossing lines," I said. "She seems to be fixated on me." Carl just kind of laughed and said, "Brother, she's ambitious, and she likes you. Take it as a compliment." I didn't think it was like that at all and told him so. "Well," he said, "unless she's threatening you, there's not much I can do." I left his office feeling stupid and paranoid. That's when the emails started. Clients I'd worked with for years began CCing my boss, asking him why I'd missed deadlines I hadn't missed. I noticed attachments were going missing from shared folders, and reports that I'd submitted were suddenly never received. When I complained, IT checked into it and said all my files had been accessed under my credentials. But the guy I was talking to said it seemed to him that they were accessed at weird hours. Of course, it came up in a meeting with my boss, and Carl said, "Look, man, I need you focused. I know you've been promoted, but this work looks really sloppy." I left his office again, confused and pissed off. And suddenly, there was Lila at my desk, her soft voice and a concerned expression on her face. "I heard Carl talk to you," she said. "You must be under a lot of stress. If you ever need any help, I'm really good at stepping in and helping." She looked at me for what I considered to be way too long of a period of time, and I diverted my eyes. I went home that night and told Emma all about how I was feeling. I just felt something was off about this woman. Emma did a little digging herself and found Lila's Instagram. It was a private account, but her profile picture was taken outside of our apartment building. Our front entrance was clearly behind her. I mean, we knew she had taken it right outside our door of our building. My chest tightened, and I went back to Carl the next morning, this time with screenshots of what we saw. "Boss, she's been near my house," I said. "This isn't workplace drama anymore. This is stalking." He looked at the pictures and frowned a little bit and said, "Okay, I'll talk to HR." But before anything happened, Lila made her next move. There was a major proposal, months of work, and it got sent to the client with errors I would never make. Wrong pricing, missing pages, and yeah, it came from my email. I know for a fact I hadn't sent that. It seemed like just minutes that I was talking to Carl when I was called back into a conference room with him and HR. The HR rep looked at me and said, "This is serious." I said, "I didn't send that." I looked down and I could see my hands were shaking. Then I just blurted out, "Check the login logs." And they did. The email had been sent from my computer. But the issue was, I was presenting in a meeting on the other side of our building at the exact same time it was sent. And that meeting had 10 other people in it. My boss said for IT to dig deeper. They even checked security footage, and it showed Lila at my desk during that time. She told the floor admin that she needed to grab a file from me. When Carl's face saw that, he went gray. Yeah, more came out. Lila had accessed my workstation multiple times. She'd searched my name in internal systems over 100 times in 2 weeks. She even pulled my home address from HR records. Well, she was fired that afternoon, and I thought it was over. But it wasn't. 2 nights later, Emma and I were on the couch watching a movie when we heard the front door to our apartment rattle. Once, twice, harder, somebody was jiggling the handle. Emma froze, and I grabbed her arm and said, "Did you lock it?" She said yes. That's when the door handle started jerking violently, and the pounding began. A voice screamed my name from the hallway, the distinct voice of Lila. "You need to talk to me," she screamed. "They're lying to you at work. Your girlfriend's lying to you. You're supposed to be with me." Emma started crying, and I grabbed my phone and called 911. Lila continued yelling outside my door, screaming about how everyone had ruined everything. Then she screamed out something that bothers me to this day. "You love me, and you just don't even know it yet." Then I heard some metal scraping out there, like she was trying to force the lock. But thankfully, I heard sirens wailing in the distance, and then Lila's voice panicked. "Don't call them. Please, don't call them." And then we heard footsteps running away and a crash from the stairwell. The police caught her 2 blocks away. She had a screwdriver and a folder on her. Inside the folder were printed photos of me. From work, from the parking garage, from outside of our building, and she had notes scribbled on the backs. "He's stressed. She's the problem. I can fix him. After promotion, we'll tell people slowly." She'd built a whole life in her head where Emma didn't even exist. In the days after all of this, more stories surfaced. Her former job, and she'd had similar complaints there. They'd just written it off as a misunderstanding. Well, in the end, Carl apologized for not listening to me right away, and HR updated policies. I kept my job as manager, but I didn't feel like I was winning anything. Even now, a year later, I'm always looking over my shoulder. I don't post where I am online anymore, and every time a car slows down near our building, I get a little testy. The scariest part is when the police took her away after we identified her. She looked at me out the cruiser door window, calm and almost smiling, like all of this was just a delay. Like she thought I still belonged to her. Thankfully, I haven't heard from her or seen her again, and I hope it stays that way. They didn't remove the pool, by Credit Expensive. When I was a kid, my family lived in a house in Grand Junction, Colorado. Before we moved in, the landlord told my parents something unsettling, that there used to be a pool in the backyard, and years earlier, their young daughter had drowned in it. The house meant a lot to them, and they made it pretty clear that we needed to take care of the property, as it was extremely sentimental and they wanted nothing changed. The pool had been buried by the time that we lived there, but again, not removed, just buried. The concrete foundation of the pool was still there, and the outline of it could be seen because the grass never really grew right. At that time, my sisters and I were too young to really understand anything, so my parents didn't tell us anything at the time. My parents didn't tell us much, and we didn't ask. But still, strange things happened in that house. Things we noticed but didn't question until much later. We had a home alarm system that would chime out loud whenever a door opened. It didn't just beep, it announced the door. For example, ding ding, garage door, or ding ding, front door. The back door, which used to lead to the pool, was still labeled in the system as pool door. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, the alarm would suddenly go off. Ding ding, pool door. Every bedroom in the house was close together, and you could hear if someone got up, walked down the hall, or went into the kitchen, but no one ever did. My parents would get up to check, and the back door would actually be open. And this didn't happen just once. It happened multiple times, and always late at night. The same thing happened with the garage door. The alarm would announce it, and again, no one had been moving around in the house. Another thing I remember clearly was the garage itself. Whenever my mom asked me to take out the trash, I'd get this overwhelming feeling of being watched the moment I stepped inside. It wasn't imagination or fear of the dark. It was intense and specific, like something was there, lurking in the shadows. I still remember that feeling today. One night, my mom was awake in the living room while the rest of us were asleep, and she said she saw a shadow move down the hallway toward the bedrooms. She assumed it was one of us kids sneaking around, so she got up to confront us. She walked past my room first and saw the shadow go into it. My door was open. Certain she'd caught someone, she walked in and flipped on the light. And as a mother, she knew instantly that I wasn't pretending to sleep. I was out. She said she checked my closet, under my bed, and around the room, and there was no one else in there. So confused, she went to my sister's room, expecting to find one of them awake. Their door was closed, and both of them were asleep too. My sisters shared a bedroom that we later realized was most likely the same room the landlord's daughter had used. We never confirmed that, it was just an assumption. But at night, they would hear tapping on the wall, and it wasn't rhythmic and it wasn't loud, just deliberate. It didn't sound like pipes, the heater, or the house settling. And one night, they started screaming for our parents. Over and over, they kept saying, "Someone is knocking! Someone is knocking!" They were screaming so loud I woke up and made my way to their room after hearing my parents rush out of theirs into my sister's. All of us could hear it too. My dad always told us it was just the heater or the pipes, and because we were kids, we believed him. Years later, when we talked about everything again, he admitted the truth. He only had said that because we were young. He really never had an explanation for that sound. Cabinets and drawers also opened on their own from time to time, and it became part of the background of the house, unsettling and never explained. Eventually, my older brother came to live with us. He stayed in the room farthest from the rest of the bedrooms on the opposite side of the house near the living room, which primarily served as an office. That room had large windows that looked directly out into the backyard, toward where the pool used to be. Note, my parents, the same as myself and sisters, never told my oldest brother anything about the history of the house, and he's 10 or 11 years older than my sisters and I. One weekend night, the rest of the family was in the living room watching TV. My brother had only lived there for a few weeks at that point, and suddenly he came out of his room fast, looking pale and shaken and genuinely terrified. He said, "Mom, there's someone in the backyard." My dad immediately went outside to check, but there was no one there. My brother claimed he always felt watched in that room, too, assuming something like what I had felt in the garage. You know that feeling where your body tingles and your stomach drops and the hairs stand up on your arms and neck? Well, my mom, already uneasy from her own experiences, contacted the landlord and told them everything that had been happening. She asked him if he had experienced anything while living there themselves. Not long after that conversation, the landlord decided to not renew our lease and told us they were moving back into the house, even requesting if we'd be willing to move out early. They didn't argue or seem surprised, but they just seemed quiet and distant. My parents always assumed the loss of their daughter had changed them deeply. We moved out not long after. Years later, when we were older, we were debating whether or not we believed in ghosts or paranormal activity, and that's when my parents finally told us what they had seen and heard while living in that house. And what made it worse was that our stories matched. The feelings, the moments, the details, all of us without ever knowing the full history at the time. Even now, telling it gives me chills. Writing it brings back that same familiar feeling, the one I had in the garage, the one that made the house feel like it was never truly empty. He Terrorized the Town. Submitted by Randy R. This just came up, and this story is from my father's perspective. I'm telling it the way he would have told me. He always told us this story when we were kids, and it just came up recently with all the snow and stuff we've been having. My dad grew up in a pretty rural town in upstate New York, the Adirondacks actually, a little east of Lake Ontario. And for those of you who don't know, that area gets a boatload of snow. I've been back to visit there, and it is a small little nowhere kind of town, but there are small clusters of neighborhoods that give it a suburban feeling when it really is the sticks. Super middle class, kids riding bikes around and people waving while they mowed their lawns. That's the way my dad always described it. But he told us about one guy who really upset everyone in the town. A guy named Rick. And yes, the names have been changed in this story. Everybody knew Rick's father, Chief Donnelly, head of the local police department. The guy had been there for what seemed like forever and even had his picture in the town hall lobby, and my dad said he had a handshake like a vice, a big dude, and everyone respected him. His son Rick? Not so much. When my dad was young, in the 50s, he said Rick was in his early 30s maybe. A weird guy with a really thick neck, and it looked like he had tattoos on his neck, but my dad was sure they weren't tattoos. He said that Rick always had this permanent smirk and was always wearing a stained sweatshirt no matter what the weather was. He drifted around for years, my dad said, always doing odd jobs, short temp gigs. And whenever he came back, he always brought trouble. The time my dad told me about that winter, he had brought an old pickup truck with a snowplow bolted to the front, and the first big storm of that season hit at the end of January. My dad said he woke up early one morning to the sound of grinding metal and an engine revving hard. He looked outside and saw this guy Rick's truck at the end of my grandparents' driveway, the blade down and shoving a mountain of snow across the entrance. My dad, being the kid that he was, at first thought he was helping, but then he noticed that Rick was pushing the snow further into the driveway. He wasn't clearing it, he was sealing it off with a wall of dense icy snow. It was nearly 3 feet high. My dad ran to get my grandpa, and my grandpa ran outside in just boots and a coat, yelling, "What the hell are you doing?" My dad said Rick just leaned out the window and grinned and said, "Plowing." When my grandfather told him he had just blocked him in, Rick apparently said, "Okay, $10 and I'll clear it." My grandfather, I guess, laughed, thinking it was a joke. But it wasn't. My dad said Rick just revved his engine and drove off, leaving both of them staring at what looked like a frozen barricade. So, obviously, they had to get to work clearing the driveway out before my grandfather had to get to work, who was obviously late. And later in the day, they found out it wasn't just my grandfather that was late to work. It was the Martin family across the street, and even an older lady 2 houses down who didn't have any reason to leave. Every driveway, Same wall of snow. Now what was odd was, the Martins and Mrs. Keller paid Rick to plow them out. My grandfather didn't. He did what he thought he should do. He called the police, but my dad said the officer who showed up just kind of shifted awkwardly around when they explained what had happened. My dad said that he made some kind of lame excuse that snow from the public plowing can always end up at driveways. When my grandfather pointed out that Rick had done it on purpose, the cop finally said, "Okay, I'll talk to him." But nothing changed. The next big snowfall, my dad said, it just got worse. If people were outside waiting for him to pull his little stunt, he would wait until everyone left for work and school, and then filled the driveway so tight that the cars couldn't get back in. My dad said the neighbor across the way, Mr. Martin, confronted him, and Rick just smiled and said, "You got a problem? Call my dad." Word spread fast. It wasn't a big town. It wasn't just our street. He was doing it all over the place. Some people, I guess, just paid him to avoid the fight, and others refused on principle. But that's when the thing with the dogs started. My dad had a big, dumb German Shepherd dog named Max. He said he was big, dumb, but really friendly, the kind of dog who should have been chasing burglars but thought they were guests. My dad said he got home from school one afternoon and he heard Max barking, but not his normal, "Hey, the mailman's here" bark. He said it was a sharp, panicked bark. He looked out the window and saw this guy Rick standing at the edge of their yard, just beyond the fence, idling his truck, but he was holding something in his hand. It was a leash. My dad said that this Rick guy was whistling and saying, come here boy," and Max was jumping against the fence, tail wagging, not knowing any better. My dad said he ran outside and screamed, "Get away from my dog!" Rick just looked at my dad and said, "Your old man still owes me for the last storm." My dad said something dumb like, "My dad doesn't owe you anything," but this Rick guy just shrugged and said, "Be a shame if your dog ever got out one day. A lot of cars on the main road." Then he drove off. Of course, my dad told my grandfather what had happened, but again, there didn't seem like there was much anyone could do. Across the street, Mrs. Keller's terrier went missing 2 days later. My dad said that she finally found him the next day, freezing and shaking under her porch, with the collar missing. Well, that's when she started paying Rick. Everyone else seemed to be doing it, but not my grandfather. Not because of the snow was everybody paying. I think everyone was scared of Rick and the fear of what he could do to not only our dogs, but them. Every conversation outside became a whisper, and no one really went around outside that much anymore. If people let their dogs out, they were walking them on their own leashes and not letting everybody just play around out in front like they always had. Whenever anything went sideways with Rick, people would call the police and they would show up, but nothing would happen. One night the neighbors were meeting at my grandfather's house to talk about what they needed to do, and that's when the doorbell rang. There on the porch stood Chief Donnelly, standing there. He said something like, "Yeah, I understand you got some concerns about my son, but I don't have any evidence of his wrongdoing." My dad said my grandfather said, "Your son is threatening our pets," but the chief just said, "That's a serious accusation. I'd be careful with what you say." But the message that they all got while standing in my grandfather's front room was, "You guys are all on your own." Finally, they had all whispered what they were going to do. They had a plan, and I still don't know to this day who actually went through with it, but they pulled a number on Rick. Another storm came up, and they got 18 inches overnight. My dad said it was one of the biggest snowstorms he ever remembered. Before they put their plan into action was when the snow came, and the next morning, every driveway was buried deeper than ever, except one. The Martins had refused to pay the week before, and their driveway wasn't just blocked. Their mailbox had been snapped off and buried in a snowbank. That was the final straw. Again, everyone met in my grandfather's front room. My dad said that he was told not to listen and go to his room, but he did his best to listen in. He only knew that something was up. The one thing that my dad always says that he tried to pick up on was someone saying something about revenge, and someone else saying it's not about revenge, it's about stopping this asshole, making sure that he couldn't use a truck to control anybody anymore. But the next day, the street was silent after another snowfall. There was no truck sound. Everything was dead silent. That is, until around 7 a.m., when Rick was walking down the middle of the road, screaming at everyone, raging about what had happened to his truck. He was pissed and carrying a tire iron, saying that whoever had done it better get their butt out into the street. Then the police arrived. But this time, it wasn't a patrol officer. It was Chief Donnelly himself. By now, my dad said all the neighbors had come out and were standing in their front porches or driveways. Nobody was hiding anymore. Rick was starting to yell at his dad, "They messed with my truck! Arrest them! They messed with my truck, Dad!" Nobody moved. And for the first time, my dad said the chief didn't look like a cop. He looked like a father who'd run out of excuses. He took his son by his arm, and suddenly, something in Rick's voice changed. It started whining. "Dad, come on, Dad!" But the chief said, "Rick, get in the car now." And the funny thing, my dad says, is it wasn't the front seat. The chief put Rick in the back, just like a common criminal. Well, the other police finally did show up and went to look at Rick's truck that had been more than disabled. All the tires had been slashed. The engine compartment had been damaged beyond repair. I mean, whoever had done what they had done really messed that truck up. But what was more disturbing was what they found in the cab. Dog collars from dogs all over that little town. They found all kinds of weird tools and a list of addresses with amounts written beside them. It was Rick's proof of his extortion and intimidation. The chief even threw in animal cruelty charges on his own son. My dad said that before the chief got in his driver's seat, he looked at everyone and said, "I apologize. I should have done this sooner." My grandfather, my dad said, looked down at him and said, "Yeah, you should have." Anyway, the reign of terror from Rick was over. My dad said everything went back to normal, kids playing outside and people letting their dogs run free without having to worry about it. And everyone was able to take care of their own driveway themselves. After hearing that story about the guy and the aliens on your podcast, I figured, what the hell? I might as well share. It's anonymous. I don't tell this story to anyone. I don't tell this story to my family. I don't tell this story at church, and I don't tell it at work either, where people trust me with things that matter. Budgets, contracts, the kind of decisions that keep a company steady. I'm a numbers person. I work in risk assessment and predictability. I believe in cause and effect and documented evidence and double-checking your sources. And that's why this bothers me, because it doesn't fit anywhere in my life. The first time it happened, I was 9 years old. My family lived outside a small Pennsylvania town, the kind with one traffic light, one gas station, and a diner that still only took cash. Our house sat back from the road, surrounded by woods, and my dad swore we were safe as long as I stayed where he'd marked the trees with orange tape. I knew those woods like a map, and I wasn't a dramatic kid. I didn't cause any trouble, and I didn't scare easy either. But one night, I woke up because of the silence. You don't really realize how loud nighttime is until it's gone. This night there was no crickets, no wind, no hum from the old box fan in my window. Just this thick, stuffed silence like my ears had been packed with cotton. I tried to sit up, but I found I couldn't. My eyes did work though, but everything else felt pinned. My bedroom door was open a crack, and the hallway light, which my mom always left on, glowed this soft yellow across the carpet. I remember thinking, I must be having a bad dream, and I even tried to yell for my dad, but nothing came out. Then the light outside my door changed. The hallway light didn't turn off. but something brighter seemed to layer over it. It was a pale white glow that had no source I could see. It filled the doorway and then my room, like this fog made out of light. It's kind of hard to explain. And that's when I saw them. 3 shapes in my doorway. They were too tall to be kids and too thin to be adults. And their heads were just wrong. They were too big, and they seemed to be sloping back. They didn't have any hair, and their eyes caught the light that was there, like a cat's, but black, completely black. And I know this sounds crazy, but I remember the smell. It was like hot metal and wet dirt. I know, this sounds crazy. One of these figures moved closer to me, and I felt this pressure in my head, like when you go underwater too fast. It didn't hurt terribly, it was just like this fullness. And then I heard a thought that I am sure wasn't mine. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I was shit scared. Then the ceiling of my room seemed to disappear. And I don't mean it broke in half, it just wasn't there anymore. Above me was a round opening of white light, and my bed was sliding upwards toward it. But there weren't any hands lifting my bed, and again, no sounds. I remember distinctly that my blanket stayed tucked around me. Then I blacked out. I woke up later, somewhere in the woods. I was still in my pajamas but barefoot, and I was lying on my back in a clearing behind our house where my dad burned the brush. The sun was coming up and the birds were chirping like they were trying to make up for lost time. I had dirt under my fingernails, and I must have had a nosebleed because I had dried blood on my lip. When I got back to the house, the back door was unlocked, so I went inside. My parents were there having breakfast. They said I had sleepwalked, but they took me to the doctor anyway. I told him about the light and the shapes and what I saw on the ceiling. He just smiled the way adults do when they think they're being kind, and he just wrote something down on a pad. He said I had a night terror, and for a long, long time, I tried to believe that. Well, I grew up. High school, 3-letter sportsman, played in the band, was even in the high school musical. I graduated 4th in my class. I was accepted to a university and got an accounting degree on my way to a CPA. I married my high school girlfriend Lisa, and we have 2 kids. I'm a normal, average guy. I coach my son's Little League team, and I go on his camping trip with the Scouts. We sit in the 3rd pew of our church every Sunday. Again, I am not a fringe guy. I don't even like scary movies or podcasts, but a friend was talking about it at work, and I figured I'd give it a listen. Since I was a kid, though, I've never slept right. It drives my wife crazy, but in our bedroom I keep blackout curtains up. I just can't stand light leaking around the edges. And if I wake up and the house is too quiet, my heart goes nuts like it did when I was 9 years old. But nothing happened for years, until this last October. I'm 42 now, and that night Lisa had taken our kids to her sister's, and I'd stayed home to finish some work. Around 11:30 at night, the power flickered, and that wasn't really unusual. We do live in a rural area. But then, everything went dead. A power outage. I didn't hear the fridge humming, I didn't hear the furnace, and there were no streetlights glowing through the curtains of my room. But there was that silence. My skin went cold before my brain caught up to me. I stood up from my desk, telling myself to take it easy, just go check the breaker. Logical steps, cause and effect. But when I opened my office door, the hallway was filled with that same pale white light I remembered from childhood. And I remember actually saying out loud, "No. No, no, no." That's when I saw something move at the end of our hall. It was taller than the door frame. I couldn't move again. My body locked like a switch that had been flipped. Again, only my eyes worked, darting around, and I was panicking my ass off. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would kill me. Then there was them. They looked the same. Thinner than any human, gray, clay-like skin. And those eyes, man, those eyes, wide, black, and reflective. One looked right at me. It seemed to be studying me the way I'd look at a strange insect. And that old familiar pressure filled my skull again. Another thought that I knew wasn't mine. You've grown up. I don't know how to explain how I heard that. Again, there was no sound, just that thought. Another shape came around the one, and it came into my living room where I was. I heard drawers opening, a slow rip of fabric. It was like my house was being searched as I stood there motionless. I tried to remember prayers, but I couldn't even remember how to think words. The one in front of me stepped closer, and its face was literally inches from mine. I could see faint lines in its skin like veins under wax, and its eyes reflected me staring back. Sweating, middle-aged guy, and terrified. Then its hand had one long finger that came out and touched my forehead. Everything went white. I was looking up from my back, and I was on a table. There was light everywhere and somehow nowhere, and there was a weird buzzing in the air. I couldn't turn my head, but I could see shapes moving around me. Then something cold pressed against my chest, my arm, and my neck. It felt like I was being cataloged. There was no pain. And honestly, it was worse. It was an indifference, like I was just some kind of file being updated. And then another thought, again, knowing it wasn't my own thought, penetrated my head. Still viable. And then I was back in my hallway, crumpled on the floor. I heard the power humming again and the furnace kicking on. I looked up at a clock and it read 11:42. There were 12 minutes gone. My shirt was on backward, and I went into the bathroom. It looked like a skeleton was staring back at me. And then I felt a pain low on my right side. I pulled up my backwards shirt, and there was a perfect circle there, the size of a dime. Of course, I didn't tell my wife or anybody else about this, but I did go see my doctor. He said it was just a benign skin anomaly. And I didn't argue, I just nodded like that made sense. As I just mentioned, I haven't told Lisa. She already worries that I work too hard. But every night since October, I've checked the locks 3 times on all of our doors and windows. I leave a lamp on in the hallway now, even though I hate the light. There's not much I can do about the silence, but before I go to sleep I listen to spa music, because now I know 2 things. Them, didn't stop. It doesn't seem like they've finished what they set out to do. And sometimes I wake up and the house is just too damn quiet, my music having stopped. And I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the silence to disappear. I still go to church, I still perform well at my job, I'm still a good husband and a good father. I still balance those accounts down to the penny. And I am sane. I cannot stress that enough. I am sane. And that's the part of all of this that scares me the most. Hope you'll read this. Weird Creature in Ladakhi Mountains by Ecstatic Tea. A couple of things to start off. This encounter took place when I was around 10, and now I'm an adult, so details may be a bit fuzzy. Another thing is I don't inherently believe in the supernatural. I grew up in a mainly atheist family, so I considered myself reasonable when it comes to otherworldly things. One trip to India my family and I took up north to Kashmir and Ladakh to visit family. And if you don't know, Ladakh is in a region of India way up in the north and has disputed borders with China and Tibet. All in all, it's a pretty remote and isolated area. We were staying in a rather rural area on top of this mountain, looking out into forested mountainsides in most directions. It was gorgeous. No light pollution or traffic, just nature and us. The first couple of nights, I slept amazingly, probably the best sleep I've ever had and ever will have. We were a half week into the trip maybe, and it was nighttime, maybe 12 or 1 a.m. My sister and I had stayed up exploring with my dad. By the time my sister had settled down, it was just me and Dad. Neither of us were tired yet, so we asked if I wanted to go out and stargaze. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with space, constellations, black holes, dark matter. I loved it all. And as a kid, I grew up in the city with light pollution everywhere, so the chances to stargaze were slim to none, and I jumped at this chance. I didn't really want to go anywhere outside our safe-lit area, but nothing was going to stop me from seeing those stars, even if I felt a little off about it. We had to walk a couple of yards away from our house because even there, light could hinder us from seeing the full extent of the night sky. A little to the left of the house, there was this opening, and remember, I was on top of a low mountain, so the opening was literally a path that led off this cliff with shrubs on either side. This was the perfect area to stargaze because as I reached the top of the path, there were no trees to obstruct my view, and the plants on either side nicely blocked out any light from behind. Of course, that's where we went. It was dead silent. No wind, no crickets, which, looking back, was very weird, just the gravel crunching under me and my dad's feet. I was too engrossed with counting all the constellations I could recognize to realize that the silence had fallen over us. At that point, we were like 1.5 yards away from the actual drop-off, and we didn't go any closer for safety reasons. The next part, I remember so vividly. My dad had his flashlight on so we could watch our step as we got closer to the edge, and out of the dead quiet silence, there was this rustling noise in the bushes off to our right. We both stopped, and my dad turned his flashlight to the bush, and this dog peeked its head through. I say dog with a question mark because that's what my child brain immediately reverted to when I saw this creature. I mean, it looked off. Its face was so insanely human, like it had these eyes that bored into my soul. You know that reflection that animals get in their eyes when the light hits it a certain way? This creature didn't have that, just 2 pits of matte darkness. I got this weird chill up my spine like one of us wasn't supposed to be there. If it was my dad and I or this creature, I'm not sure. Now, I've been to India a lot, and the cities have stray dogs everywhere, and I love animals probably as much as I loved space, so I would pet and feed every one that I could. Yeah, I know you're not supposed to do that, but I was just a kid. In my 11-year-old animal-loving mind, this creature was a dog that could be a pet just like anyone else, just like every other one. I ignored the gut feeling I had and assumed I was feeling weird because of the lack of oxygen at the height we were at. So I reached my hand out to it as if to pet it, and it moved a little more forward. That's when I could tell that this dog was a really fucking weird dog, if it even was a dog. I mean, its proportions were off, like the joints in its legs were higher than they should have been. Its neck was too long and its fur was slick, so slick it looked like it could have been fuzzy skin. I remember my dad grasped my shoulder firmly, an obvious command to not move, and he whispered a low, "Stop." I thought it was him being overly protective and not letting me pet a dog because it was wild and could have had rabies, so I turned around to look at him and say something, but I stopped because I saw the look he had on his face. He was pale and ashen-faced. He was uneasy, almost scared. I'd never seen him look like that, so that's when I got a little freaked out too. Then he said, "Don't pet that thing." I slowly turned back to it, and every hair in my body standing up at that point, and I watched it retreat a little further back into the bushes. Its eyes never left mine, and that's the part I remember so vividly. It never broke eye contact with me. Its eyes didn't flit around like a cornered or aggressive animal. I mean, even humans don't hold eye contact the way that thing was staring at me. My dad turned off his flashlight, maybe to use it as a weapon or something, but just as the light left, that creature vanished too. It backed into the bushes and made no sound, not even a rustle of the leaves. I don't know how long we stood there. Part of us expected it to come lunging out or slink around the other side of the bushes, but it never did. And here's another weird thing. There was nowhere for it to go. As I mentioned, we were staying on top of a mountain. I mean, a low one, but still a fairly steep one. My dad and I were at the edge of a drop-off. There was no way up or down in that area. On either side of that path to the drop-off were low bushes, and on either side of those bushes were more houses. Unless that thing had buried a hole under the bushes or somehow made its way down that steep mountain drop with no noise, then I have no idea where it could have gone. For some extra context, the day before I saw this creature, we decided to go on a hike in the Himalayan mountain range. The sky was clear and our visibility was great, and it wasn't deathly cold outside as it was during summer. The first part of the hike was great, beautiful views and breathtaking nature. I remember we almost got to the flat area of the trail and it started to get cloudy outside. Some of us wanted to head back, but we decided to push on, and only a couple of minutes later it started raining. Cold, icy, hard bits of rain. And then we realized it was turning into hail. We all ran for cover as the size of the hail grew, and I was always the runt of the group, small and scrawny. So I wedged myself under this massive rock, and it was almost like a shallow cave. I could see everyone else running for cover, but the mouth of the opening was shaped so that it had this overhang where no one could really see me. It felt like we waited there forever, when in reality it was probably only a couple of minutes. But while I was wedged into that crack, I realized that it was completely dry, which was strange because the wind was strong and definitely would have blown the rain and hail into the opening. I had this weird sinking gut feeling, like when you know you fucked up and all the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. It was making me frozen in fear. I originally thought because the crack was so low that nothing could fit in there, and I didn't realize that the hole I was in went a lot further back into the rock than I realized. Something else was sitting there moments before I crammed my way in. I didn't care that it was still hailing, and I scrambled my way out, not looking back. Everyone was surprised to see me come out. I mean, they'd all lost sight of me and didn't know where I'd gone. It was still hailing, yes, but I wanted to get the hell out of that place. I rounded up everyone as the stubborn 11-year-old I was and forced us to run back down the trail. And luckily at that time, the hail was less severe and more like icy raindrops again. Though normally I couldn't keep my mouth shut, I decided not to tell anyone about my experience in that hole because I knew I was just going to get scolded. I felt off for the rest of the day and tried to enjoy the rest of nature with my family, but for some reason I felt weirdly sick. I just chalked it up to the lack of oxygen at the height we were at and went on with the trip. The day went on, and that night was when the encounter I've told you happened. Were they related? Maybe, I'm not sure, but I think I disturbed something when I hid under that rock. I don't know what that thing was. Skinwalker adjacent, I'd say, but I'm not sure. We have our own non-Western creatures that are similar to skinwalkers, but I did some research and couldn't find any exact Indian creatures that matched what I had experienced. Oh, anyway, if anyone out there has any idea what it might have been or have had a similar encounter in India, I'd love to hear it. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.